Hey guys, so welcome to another episode of The Lived Experience, and with me today is a special guest called Dan Cahill. Now, Dan Cahill, how old are you, mate? You're 28, 29 now. 27, so younger than I thought. But Dan is a very, very successful business owner in the lawn and garden care space for Jim's Mowing. I think you've got a massive crew working for you, and you do extremely well for yourself. And we got talking in the office the other day because we obviously worked there as well. And you just dropped that you had I think a dad with bipolar as well. So when you mentioned that to me, the show I do is all about sharing people's lived experiences with parents, especially with mental health. And when you dropped that, I thought, who better to ask? Because you're extremely successful at such a young age, yet you had a bipolar parent, or you have a bipolar parent in your life, Dan. So maybe you want to start up and give yourself a bit of an introduction in regards to that.
Okay. Well, look, not a lot of people realise this about me. But part of the reason for my success is because of the mental health situations I've had around me, and it's what drives me. It's one of the main drives that I have as to why I do what I do. So as you said, I do have quite a successful business that I'm operating right now within Jim's Mowing, and a lot of that is because of the drives that I've always had, especially from my childhood. And it's kind of led into going into business and being able to build such a strong company.
Now that's a great thing I really want to get into, because I think it's a lot of kids in our situation. You go one of two ways. You can either go really use that as a motivator to get you going and do things in life, or you can basically use it as a crutch, or to play the victim and sort of not do anything and go the other way. So when did you identify that yourself growing up, that you were going to go that way?
I think I identified it probably around the age of, I want to say maybe 8 or 9, that I was kind of going to push myself to go. A lot of people that struggle in broken homes and, homes that are affected by mental health, can go one of two ways. And I've seen personally a lot of friends of mine that have gone the opposite way and gone down and led to drugs or even worse, suicide or anything like that. So I was kind of opened up to that at an early age, and so that's where I kind of decided that I was gonna push myself in the opposite direction.
Well, it's a very mature thing to realise at the age of 8 or 9. I don't think I realised it till I was 24. So 8 or 9, was it? So what was your home situation like at the time?
So my home situation, I grew up in Dufton, which is close to Dandenong. So we were in a government-funded housing, and a lot of the houses around me were government-funded as well. Our family didn't have a lot of money by any means at all, and a lot of the stress came across from my father's bipolar that he had, and so that led on to it affected my mother and the way that her personality was and her demeanour. It affected mine and my sisters and my brothers. Affected everyone around us from growing up in that kind of demeanour. And so people with mental health issues, from my perspective, their thinking is a little bit. It's quite erratic. From my father's thinking was quite erratic. And he couldn't really filter out what he wanted to say, and it's kind of like he had a million thoughts going on at once, and he couldn't really grasp the right one, so he would kind of just do it all. And so, as I said, I grew up in quite a very, very poor household, where we struggled quite a fair bit, and the money that did come in, my father would go and spend it on music equipment for himself, or computer equipment, and we'd be left with not a lot of food in the cupboards, and not a lot of presents for Christmas, and things like that. And because my mum was because she was surrounded by my dad the whole time, and she felt like she had no escape, it ultimately changed the way that she was thinking as well.
Now with your dad, is he bipolar 1, bipolar 2? What's his condition?
Look, I'm not sure. So I'm no expert in mental health. All I can talk about is the situation that I was around. So I do know that he had been diagnosed with bipolar when I was younger, but I didn't find out if it was one or two.
On the sounds of it, maybe bipolar 1 if he's more manic and stuff, and lots of thoughts going and all that sort of stuff, and
Yeah, maybe. He was, unfortunately, when he was in his manic stage, he was actually, quite a funny person to be around. Or he would make people laugh, and he would try and be, the jokester in the room. But then when he was down on his, when he was on the other side of it, it was very violent, and just not a great atmosphere to be around at all. So you would be walking on eggshells, basically. You wouldn't know what to expect from him because, he could come home from work, and if he's had a bad day at work, because he didn't really have anyone to talk to at work, because he didn't have friends or anyone to really talk to at work, because no one wanted to be around him, he would come home and take it out on us.
So your dad did work though. He was working.
Yes, he was working. Yes. Okay. He did have a job, and he was helping pay the bills. My mum took care of most of that because she was working at the time also.
Yeah.
But a lot of his money went towards his music equipment and his computers.
Now, growing up, when did you first realise maybe your dad was a bit different, or was it something that was ever explained to you, or how did you come about that?
Well, I think I kind of learned it when I went into prep, when all my school friends would talk about how good their dads were, and they would talk about, presents that they might go get or holidays that they might go on. And I had school friends that would constantly ask me why I had so many bruises on me. And my mum would always have to tell me to say I fell off my bike, or, and this was something that I would have to say non-stop. And so other kids didn't rock up to school with bruises. So that's where I kind of realised that my dad wasn't, he wasn't like other fathers. And my mum wasn't like other mothers as well because of what she went through. And so when you're at a young age, you've got a high loyalty to your family. And so you want to kind of keep their name to be something to be respected. And you become ashamed if anyone thinks down on your family or yourself, and you become quite embarrassed. Yeah. So you kind of keep it to yourself a fair bit. But I did notice at a young age, especially when friends would, tell me that my dad was all energetic or even family.
Yeah, no, I completely empathise with you, mate. And I was just going to make that point. So your father and your mother were together for most of your childhood, or was it?
They broke up, I think, when I was about 11 years old or 12 years old.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the best decision my mum could do. I personally don't think I don't think she would be around today if she didn't leave. That's how bad it was. So
yeah, I think a lot of people don't realise, but most people, let's say if they've got kids and they've got mental illness, like a lot of the time they go to be a single parent pretty quickly because of the the intense toll that someone with schizophrenia or bipolar can have on the family unit as well. It's a very rare that I've ever heard that someone will stay together the whole time, and support the other person with that condition. It's very rare.
Yes. Yeah.
Now with your your exposure to this, did you ever get any support from the government, or what was done? Because you're probably 6 years younger than me, but do you remember getting any help? Because you're in government housing, so government housing, you think they would have identified you with a social worker or some community worker or something.
No, back then there was. I didn't even realise there was help for it. I didn't realise. So I was told when I was at school I wasn't allowed to tell anyone, the teachers or the principal, because the teachers and principal would actually ask me where the bruises come from as well.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just me. I had my brother going to that school for the first year in prep. He only lasted a couple of weeks there, but he came to school with bruises as well, which is where they kind of started asking quite a few questions, and so we actually started covering up. So even on hot days, we'd be wearing jumpers to hide the bruises, and yeah.
So I'm just very surprised that no one identified it at all. But I was going to say, did you learn much about your dad's condition, or was it something you actively learned about? Was it just like you go, right, this is this, he acts this way, we label it as this, and that's it? Was there any sort of education you tried to do yourself on it?
Mum, later on, but this is when, after Mum had broken up with my father, she had explained to me why it is that he acts the way he does. And so, look, I think at a young age, because of mental health, and look, my brother also, both my brothers, struggle with mental health as well. So one of them has ADD and the other has ADHD.
Yep.
And so I kind of learned how to read people very well from it. So even though I didn't fully understand what Dad's condition was, or my brother's, I could read how they were going to be, and I could kind of tell from their demeanour or facial expressions that he would pull, or just the way that he would the way that he would talk, whether or not it was going to be a good situation or a bad situation, and what kind of situation he would lead on to.
Well, how did you deal with that as a kid? Because it's a highly stressful situation to be. Your parents supposed to be one, who cares with you and stuff, and you're constantly having a second guess if you even talk to them because you don't know what mood they're going to be in. It's a very tough place to be in as a kid.
How did I deal with it? Well, look, the way that I dealt with it, I'm the oldest brother in the family, and I think the way that I dealt with it was my brothers didn't really have anyone anything to grasp onto. They didn't have any sort of light to grasp onto within such a dark situation, and I didn't either. And I realised that what I'm going through, they're going through as well, and they're younger than what I am. And so I started realising that I needed to help them out, and hopefully that would help me out as well. So I actually started. When Dad would hit into us, or even Mum would hit into us, I started taking the hittings for my younger brothers as well, and I became a lot more. I found that if I was more positive within the family, and I made other people happy, even though I didn't like doing the things that they did, but I found that if I pleased my dad with his kind of obsessions was music. If I pleased him with that, then he would leave everyone else alone. So I would sit there and listen to him play the guitar for hours and hours on end, and that would keep him away from the rest of the family for the whole night.
No,
so
I think
I stepped up, and I realised that I needed to be the positive one in the family at a very young age, and in a weird way, it was almost like in such a negative environment, that positivity that I kind of brought around and started making other people happy kind of became a little bit infectious. And so people started, my brother, and my mum and my sisters started to kind of be around me a bit more often, and I could start to see that they became a lot more positive as well.
It's very, very moving hearing that sort of stuff. I was going to say as well, did your dad ever did he ever get hospitalised because of his condition, or was there any incidents where he had to go to hospital, or do you remember that growing up at all?
No, he never got hospitalised because of his condition. He got hospitalised because of what he would do to other people because of his condition.
Oh, okay.
So, which is the issue, especially within the family. The family knew that, my mum was getting beaten nightly, I was getting beaten nightly, my brothers were too, and so my uncle several times came over and he would hit into my dad, but never really stopped him because my uncle lived a bit too far away.
Now, when your parents eventually separated, how did that come about? Was it just your mum just said, this is enough on everyone and we just sort of have to get away from it? And how was the period like after that? Because I can't imagine it would have been easy. It just would have been a clean break.
Well, my dad nearly killed my mum.
Right.
In one of his... he woke up, I think it was at 3 a.m. in the morning one night, and all I remember was getting woken up from my uncle. But what I heard was that my dad had woken up, and they were going through troubles. They were going through troubles the whole time. And he'd actually woken up while she was asleep. She was dead asleep, and he put his hands around her neck and started strangling her so that she couldn't breathe. And so she had to try and hit him off and get him off her. And then she had to rush out of the house, call her brother, and then he came around and got us kids out of that situation. So that's kind of what led to my mum leaving my dad.
Yeah. Now, what happened after that? Was there something where you guys were safe still, or was there still issues, or what happened with your dad after that?
So what happened after that was Mum left Dad, and she found a new partner, and she moved to Ballarat. And she asked all us kids who we wanted to stay with, and all my siblings said that they wanted to stay with my mum, except for me. What I was saying before about the whole positivity, I was the positive light in my dad's life, and that kind of kept him away from the rest of my family. I realised that he didn't have anyone at the time he was completely left alone, and I was the only positive person in his life, or the only person he really had. And so that kind of made me feel guilty into the fact that I needed to stay with him, because otherwise, who else was he got?
Mm.
So they all went to Ballarat, and I stayed with my dad in Berwick. We moved to Berwick by that point. Sorry.
Now, how was that time then? Was just you and your dad? Was it something? How was that?
That was I strongly regret doing that now, because had I known what I know now, I definitely wouldn't have put myself in that situation, because Dad was dealing with a lot of grief from losing his family, and that made his condition a lot worse. It amplified it quite a bit, and my dad wasn't the sort of person that would deal with his emotions very well. As I said, he was very violent. So I ended up taking the normal beatings every day, but they became worse. And so I ended up with more bruises and fractured ribs at one time. It wasn't a pretty environment to get to be into, and I think the reason that I ended up leaving in the end was because one of the beatings that my dad gave me was I was sitting down on the couch playing my Xbox, because the Xbox original was out at that time, and I was playing San Andreas. And he didn't like that I hadn't gotten dinner ready at this point, because I always had to make dinner because there was no one else to make dinner.
Yep.
And I made breakfast for him and me, and I made lunch for me and him, and I would pack his lunch and put it in his like a lunchbox container, and he would take it to work.
And how old were you doing this from? At what age?
I was about 12 years old at this
12 years old. So you're essentially an unpaid young carer, which is what they'd call you now, but young carer.
Yeah. So this is probably about from the age of 12 to 14 and a half, I reckon, that this went on, that I lived with Dad. And the reason I got out was because he'd beaten me this one time so bad that I could no longer walk, because he punched me in the legs. I can't remember how many times he punched me in the legs. I was sitting down on the couch and I couldn't move, and he kept on punching me in each leg. And I reckon he at least punched me in the legs 10 times in each leg. And my legs, I couldn't feel them. And I couldn't even get up. I couldn't get away from him. Yep. And I remember he walked upstairs for some reason, and I realised I needed to get out because of what had happened to my mum when she had left. I realised that this is something that it's leading up to. And so I ended up crawling outside of the house after he punched my legs because I could no longer walk. And I crawled outside the house. This is about, I want to say, 6 o'clock at night. I'm crawling across the ground, and I get out the front door, and I crawl across the front lawn onto the nature strip, and I start screaming out to my friend that lived next door to me for someone to help me. And I'm screaming in the middle of the street, and no one had come out, and Dad heard me scream from upstairs, and he quickly ran down the stairs, grabbed me, and dragged me back into the house. And he didn't hit me after that, which I was thankful for. But it was kind of one of those. I woke up and I realised I can't be here, and so I decided to move in back with my mum again. Yep.
Now, why did you ever decide? Did you ever think about calling the cops, or did you ever go and telling anyone? Or
as I said, I was very embarrassed for anyone to know about what my personal life was, because I had been going through it for such a long time.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing. You didn't call the cops. You didn't ask for help, and that was the first time that I actually went and I went out into the street and actually asked for help from my neighbours, because I was worried about my life at that point. That was the first time I'd actually ever tried to tell anyone about what was happening. Didn't happen, but no, I didn't go to anyone. It just, for whatever reason, it's kind of like it was kind of like a brainwashing. You don't go to the police. You don't tell anyone about what happens in this house. What happens in this house is a family matter.
It's crazy hearing this sort of stuff. But did you chalk it down to his mental illness and sort of go, oh, that's just him because he's got mentally ill? Or was it just is that how you reconciled it in your own head?
Yeah, absolutely. So I knew that there was a part of him that was still this funny guy that wanted the best for people. That when he flipped the switch, it wasn't there, and so I realized I knew that it wasn't really like his fault, and that's kind of how I dealt with it.
Yeah.
So, every morning that I would wake up in that house, I had a routine, and so every morning I'd wake up and I'd make his breakfast for him. I'd put the toast in the toaster and I'd start making the lunches for the day. This is at 4:30 in the morning because he's getting ready for work at 4:30 in the morning, and I had to get ready for school. And I'd wash the clothes the night before, and I'd put them on the ironing board that morning so they were nice and fresh and hot, ready to go. And then he would head off to work, and he would take me down to this carer that would look after me in the morning until about 7:30 until it was time to go to school. And then I'd come home from school, and he would finish school at about 6:00 at night. He would finish work about 6:00 at night. I would be back home from school from about 3:30, and I would go around and I'd clean the whole house, and I'd prepare dinner. And if there wasn't enough items for dinner at that time in the pantry, I would go up to the local Coles and I would shoplift the items that were needed to be able to cook dinner so that he wasn't irate when he came back home because he didn't want dinner to not be made. And then I'd have dinner ready, and then after we finished dinner, I would put the washing on, and then I would go into his studio and listen to him play music for hours on end. And most nights some nights it could be as late as 2 a.m. that he was playing music, and some nights it could be as early as 11 p.m. And I would sit there in this room for hours on end after school, hours and hours in this one room. And if I fell asleep, which I always did because every night I only would get 3-4 hours sleep a night, he would, every time I would nod off in his chair, he would slap me across the face.
Jeez.
To wake me up and tell me that I was being disrespectful. And I'd fall asleep every 20 minutes, half an hour, and then I'd get another slap in the face to be woken up again. And then when he felt tired, he would go to bed, and then I could go to bed as well. And I was kind of like, in a weird way, I was his counsellor because I was the only person to talk about his problems and about his feelings and about his emotions. He needed some way to escape his own reality, and I was that escape for him. He would go into that music room and shut everything out, and I was that person that would help him out.
Yeah, the term is, I think I've been looking at, they call it emotional incest, where the child is the emotional support for the parent, whereas the parent should be the emotional support for the child. And you find a lot of people with bipolar use their kids as their emotional support. And it's not healthy, right? You got, if you're 8, 10 years old, 12 years old, and you're the emotional, well, they view you as their emotional support and that sort of thing, right? Whereas it's supposed to be the other way around, So it's a very hard situation to deal with as a kid. You don't really know any better. Now, did you ever go to a mate's house and sort of compare it to yourself and go, what the hell is going on? Like, there must have been a stage where you're sort of looking at, you might have went to, this happened to me, like when I was a kid, I used to go to a friend's house and go, it'd be mother and dad there, and it was a pretty normal job. Like, this is pretty nice. Did you ever go, why can't I have this? Or did it ever cross your mind that it wasn't the situation which you should be in?
I used to actually wag school a fair bit because I couldn't really, I would fall asleep at my desk at school a lot. And I would play up. I wasn't the best of kids because what I was going through at home, I went and I kind of like, I went and released my anger at school. So I was the sort of kid that was in a lot of punch-ons at school. I was always doing the wrong thing, and I was always wagging school. So I'd been suspended in detention and that, and obviously whenever I would get suspended, I would get a flogging from dad again. But that was kind of my escape. I was acting out quite a fair bit, and I was wagging school, and I was going over to my friend's house for the whole day, just enjoying the life that my friends had. And, that kind of their parents weren't home, but it was kind of nice to have like some sort of normality. So as I said, going through that stage, that 2.5, 3 years where I was alone with him, I wasn't a great kid, and it was because of a lot of the things that I was going through at home. As I said, I was shoplifting, and at school I was selling smokes at school for $1 each, and buying more packs and making more money to buy more things. So it wasn't a great time. Yeah.
Now you've gone through. Thanks for sharing all that, because I think it's important to share that, and that's the reality of what goes on in these houses, right? And people don't know it, and they might turn a blind eye to it, but that's the reality of it. I'm sure there's people who can hear your sort of stuff and empathise with it as well. But I was going to say because you've gone through a heap of childhood trauma, right? Now, as we said at the start of this thing, you can sort of go two ways with this sort of thing. You can either go and use it as a real motivating thing to get, to really build a good life, or you can sort of just use it as your crutch and fall into all sorts of things with drugs and alcohol and use it as an excuse to get past that pain. So what did you do? Have you done anything to work on that sort of these experiences, or to get past this sort of heavy traumatic events?
Yeah, well, what I found is that so the way that I dealt with it back when I was younger, before my brothers and sister left, was I found that by helping them, it made me feel better. And so one of the ways that I've been dealing with it, my own personal way of dealing with, the traumatic things that have happened in my life is, for whatever reason, I don't know what it is, but if I found that if I help people in things that I've already experienced, then for whatever reason it helps me out a bit more with what I've experienced. I would like to see other people getting through their things, and it kind of helps me get through my thing as well. Yeah, that's one of the ways that I've kind of look. I went and seen a counsellor. I seen later on in high school. I seen a counsellor, and it wasn't really my thing. And then later on in life, I went and seen a therapist as well, but it still wasn't my thing. And I found that my thing to get me through this is helping people, and that's sort of my drive.
It's good to hear that. But I think with counselling, counselling's an interesting one. Like I don't like psychiatrists or psychologists at all. And for me, it would be brings a lot of bad memories going to be even near a psychologist or psychiatrist. So, when I went to go see, when I had to try probably a couple as well, try 3 or 4. I think it's counselling as well. People think the first one's going to work for them. It's like dating. You've got to try. You might have to try 10 before you find someone you connect with and get on with. But it's a heap of heavy trauma, mate, and you've done extremely well to get where you are today and not let that hold you back in any way. And I just wanted, standing that at the age of 8 or 9, you can basically have that perspective to look at things that way. I think a lot of people, might be in their 20s or even 30s, will never even resolve that. They always just keep relying on the I'm a victim mentality from their experiences.
Yeah. Look, I've people have had it worse than me, and that kind of, in a way, it humbles me a little bit, because I can see that people have had it worse than me, and that helps me, get through what I went through. A lot of the things in my childhood didn't my dad was only one part of it, but because obviously we're talking about mental health, I'll keep it on that. But a lot of the things that I went through, it kind of made me stronger. And that's, for whatever reason now in my life, I have this mentality. The reason is because of what I went through. I have this mentality that I'm able to get through anything because of what I've already gotten through. And I've found that, anything's possible. Especially after what I went through, I realised that if I can get through that, I can get through anything.
Well, do you think if you had a cushy life, let's say if you had the traditional, let's say 2 parents, both work a job, or maybe one works a job and a bit and a half, do you think you'd be in the same position you were now?
No, not even close. So the reason that I have the personality that I have is because of what I went through, because I had to grow up a lot earlier than what most people need to, or should. I was basically, at a young age, raising my brothers. I was their father figure. And so I continued that still till this day. I still am like a father figure to my siblings, where I help them out in life. And a big part of the reason that I bought the Jim's Mowing franchise when I bought it was because my brothers that struggle with ADHD and ADD, they couldn't find a job, and no one, even though I knew they were hard workers, no one was willing to take them on because of their mental health. And because of their mental health, they went to a special school for special needs children, and they didn't get the same education that I was able to get, or anyone else was able to get, and so they were put back quite a fair bit. And so that kind of said to me, hey, I'm still that person that's got to raise my brothers. So buying the business, I instantly decided to take on my brother as an employee as soon as I possibly could, and then my other brother as well along with that, to help them out in life.
Oh, good on you. And we won't just say you got a small business; you got a pretty big business. So you've done really well for yourself in a short space of time. And I think maybe as well, if from someone with your such a traumatic past, you've got so much courage to do these things, right? To take that step into business at a young age and to take on all this work, to put on 6 employees, whatever you've got. You know what I mean? Like it's so good that you've been able to harness that for a really positive thing. There's a book, I don't know if you ever heard it, by a guy called David Goggins, called Can't Hurt Me. And the way you're describing your childhood is very similar to yours. And he, he used that as a fuel as well to go on and do all these great things as well. But I highly recommend that if you ever get a chance, Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I reckon you'd really, really connect with it. But I was going to say, what about your relationship with your dad now? Is it something that exists, or what's the go there?
So at the age of 15, I'd moved out of his house and I'd moved in with Mum. And Mum was living in Hallam at this point, which was kind of close to where I grew up in Dufton.
Yep.
And I remember that Mum wanted us to go and visit our dad every 2 weeks on the weekend. So Saturday and Sunday we'd spend at his house every 2 weeks.
Even after all that stuff, there's still, I would have been, it's pretty, who knows what could have happened in those 2 weeks, to hold it against someone. And
yeah. Well, that's it. So look, I didn't go back there. It took me about 3 months to go and finally see him again on that weekend. And the first time that I went back there, Dad, his house was a mess because I was doing all the cleaning and cooking and everything while I was living there because he's not that person. Mum was always that person. And so when I went there, the house was a complete bomb. It looked like nothing had been done pretty much since I had left. And he came to me and he said, "Right, Daniel, I want you to get in there and get all that washing done." Well, something along the lines of that. So all the washing the clothes. And I was supposed to go over there to spend the weekend with him and try and enjoy father time.
Yeah.
And I said, "Look, I'm not here for that. I'm not here to wash your clothes. I'm not here to clean your house. That's your role." I said, "I'm here to spend time with you as your son." And which was quite a hard thing at that age to stand up and say, "No, I'm not doing it." It was the first time I'd ever really told him no. And he didn't like that I'd said, "No, I'm not here for that," because it was disrespectful in his eyes. And so I remember he punched me across the jaw. And I was quite irate. I had a lot of hate towards him, and as I told you, I was
understandable, very understandable. Very understandable.
I had a lot of school punch-ons even after I had left living with him, and I was around the sorts of people that would hang out at the station and the undesirables, and so even
the Eshays now. I think they're called Eshays.
Yeah, probably. But I would go to parties and would get in punch-ons, and so I got quite confident in my ability to fight at this point, and I kind of needed that ability as well in the atmosphere that I was with my dad. So the reason I pushed myself to learn how to fight so well was because I knew that I would have to do it against Dad, and so at this point he punched me across the jaw. And I lost it. I seen red. I have quite bad anger issues because of my childhood as well. That was one of the first times I'd seen myself on a leash. I went tunnel vision at the time, and I couldn't see here or here. And all I could see was his face, and it was kind of like he became like this distant figure. Even though he was standing right next to me, he was very distant. It was kind of like I was a little bit dizzy. But I can't explain the feeling. It was this mad rush. And I just launched. I launched for him like I would any other kid that, I got in any other punch on with. And I remember I said to him, I said to him, I'm going to effing kill you. And I started throwing my fist at him, and I hit him quite a few times, and I dazed him because I cracked him in the jaw. And he went down to the ground. I was 15 at this point, and he said, "Please stop hitting me. Please stop hitting me." And I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop because of how angry I was, and I kept on hitting him. I ended up breaking his ribs that day because I couldn't stop myself, and I ended up having. He had boarders living in his house, and one of them actually had to run out and try and pull me off him because I just lost it. And so after that age of 15. It's never really been the same with him. I didn't speak to him for about 7 years after that. And I let him back into my life about 7 years later. And I think this is, or maybe a little bit, probably about 7 when I had my first child. Because I thought, you know what, maybe it's changed. Maybe I'll give him an opportunity with my daughter. And I gave him that opportunity, and he was still the same person, and he was still doing the same things. And when he found out where I lived, he started stalking our house.
Jeez.
And so he would go to my cars, and he would open my car doors, and then he would send me a message and say, "Hey Dan, I just thought I'd let you know I've just gone past your house and your car doors are open." And so it wasn't just once that he did this. This was several times. And so he had this. He would go past my house nearly every night, and which is where I realised that he's a very, very dangerous sort of person, and I don't want anyone like him around my family, because of what I know what he's capable of, and that scares me because I know that I'm strong enough to stop him, but my wife's not, and my kids certainly not. And so that's the scariest thing, is not knowing when he's gonna be there.
Yeah, but I think this is like, I'm not saying it's anyone else would be as serious as what you're describing, but I think this thing with kids with parents with mental illness, they always have this guilt towards them, and they'll always give them another chances, or they'll never prioritize themselves. It's always the parent over themselves. I think that's really got to change. I think a lot of kids with parents with mental illness, we always feel guilty towards them when it shouldn't be that case, and we need to really, start prioritizing ourselves. It's sort of like you pay your dues, or you've definitely paid your dues, but like you pay your dues, and from let's say from 18 onwards or whenever, your priority should really be you first. And if that other person affects you in any way, you just have nothing to do with them. That's the way it's got to be looked at.
Yeah, well, I didn't realise that, and then I regret letting him back into the life, into my life, because of how dangerous he is. And I've set up cameras at the front of my house, and make sure I lock my doors every night and lock all the cars, and because he's just not someone that you would ever want to get on their bad side, because you don't know what he's going to do when you're not watching.
Now, is he getting treatment or something? Like, because obviously with bipolar, your brain tends to deteriorate as you get older. Like, is he getting treatment, or is he just...
He was on treatment for a little while, and then he decided to take himself off treatment because for some reason, he thought that he'd done research on whatever website. And,
the case it is these days with a lot of topics, yeah.
It told him that he didn't need to take the medication anymore to mellow himself out and to balance himself. Instead, if he ate a healthy diet and he
it can fix your chemical imbalance in the brain, yeah.
Yeah, he had a lot more vegetables than that brought out his mental health. So he went and started eating very healthy, and he thought that it was helping out his mental health, but clearly wasn't.
What you describe is quite common, Daniel. My mum was the same. I think a lot of people with bipolar, they think they think they're all better, and they will just stop taking their medication, which they've got to take every day, and then they relapse, and and away they go. It's a massive cycle. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, look, when I left when I was 15, he no longer had anyone to confide in. He had no one that was his counsellor or his punching bag, as I like to call it. But he became alone, and he didn't have anyone around because no one wants to be around him. And from that, he sold his house, and he spent all the money on stupid items because he can't filter out what is a good idea and what's a bad idea. He just doesn't buy things rationally. So all the money he made from selling his house, he lost. I haven't spoken to him in over a year now since all this happened. So I've been speaking to him for 7 years, and now I haven't spoken to him for a year. The last time I was talking to him, he was actually homeless. And so he was living in his van. And I think from what I'm gathering now is I reckon he's probably still in that same situation where he can't escape his and look, that's the sad thing about it. If he was his normal person, if he was the person, that funny person that I seen, that that character that you could get along with at any party when he was in his I don't know if they call it manic state, when he was happy, he would be fine, because that's the real Rick. But unfortunately, because of this mental health issue that he's got, he's lost everything. He's lost everyone, and he's now struggling in life quite substantially because of the mental health, and just because he hasn't got help for it, and he hasn't taken the right medication.
Yeah, I think managing the condition is very, very important. If you can have two people with pretty similar, let's say bipolar, or let's say on the spectrum, and one person manages their condition properly, might have a lot of support, and the other person doesn't. It's just a complete worlds apart. One can probably function a lot better. Like one obviously will function a lot better, and then the other one, as you said, there's a lot of homeless people with untreated mental health conditions, and unfortunately, if they don't want help or they can't get help, that's what ends up happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Going back to what I was saying about how, because you had asked, do you think that I would still be the same if I grew up in a normal, had a normal childhood with two loving, caring parents? What a big thing that I got from that is my father, he never liked mistakes. He believed that any mistake, it shouldn't happen, and if you made a mistake, it was because you weren't thinking about what you were doing, or you weren't thinking ahead, and it was stupidity. And so mistakes weren't acceptable in his eyes. And so I grew up always knowing in the back of my head that I can't make a mistake, because if I make a mistake, I'm going to get belted for it. It doesn't matter how small the mistake was. And so because of that sort of mindset that was drilled into me at a young age where I can't make mistakes, my whole life now, even though mistakes are okay to make, I still kind of consciously don't ever want to make mistakes because of what I went through in my childhood. And because of that, I've become a bit of a perfectionist, which is, believe it or not, actually helps me towards growing my business. Because I never want to make a mistake, and I always want to do everything perfect. I want to always do everything. I always want to be active in it and doing the best decision at the best time. And so that's a big reason. That factor there is a big reason as to why my business is the way it is and part of my culture.
Yeah, well, we're definitely all shaped by our childhoods, whether people want to like it or not, and then, if when you get a bit older, you might get a bit more, you get a bit more tuned and go, well, why do I do this certain thing, or where do I get this habit from? And it's always from the childhood, something there, and it's great to hear you've harnessed or you're appreciative of those really hard, extremely hard lessons, but you've been able to apply them and make them a massive success. Because I want to talk real quickly now about your business. So you started at the age of, how old were you, 24, 25 when you started your franchise?
I would have been 20... Yeah, probably 24. I reckon I would have been 24, yeah. 24.
Now, at the age of 27, do you want to just tell everyone how much you're turning over, if you can?
So in the last financial year, we got hit with COVID pretty hard, as you guys know. I think we were locked down for about 3.5 months within the last financial year for mowing. Mowing was anyways, and we weren't allowed to do mowing. And I was still able to make a bit over $600,000 in sales without working for 3.5 months.
And that's in revenue, and you've got 6 staff, don't you? Is this 6 staff?
Yeah, I have 6 staff, and it all sort of started from when I first started the business by myself. In that first 12 months, I was able to make a bit over 300,000 because of the drive I have, and because I never wanted to make a mistake, and I always wanted to strive for perfection. And so, I was up at the brink of dawn, and stayed up late and did everything. Worked 7 days a week, and barely took any days off at all for the whole year.
You've got an insane work ethic. But you're a fantastic example of those really tough, bloody experiences, and you've just taken so much positives out of it. I don't know if do you think that's an innate thing that you've just had in your let's say, your genetic makeup, or who do you get it from? Your mum or something, or your mum's side? Where do you get that from?
I don't think I get it. No, definitely not from my mum's side. And definitely not from my dad's side either. It's something that I think was learnt along the way. And so, no, I didn't really have anyone to teach me. It was something that I learnt along the way. And when I first started at McDonald's, which was my first job, I learnt a lot about business within McDonald's. And the drive that I had, I brought into McDonald's. I remember I used to go into McDonald's and try and get as many shifts as I could, because I wanted to make as much money as I possibly could. And I ended up working for free every day, 7 days a week, to get to be able to become better, so I could get more shifts. And then they started giving me more shifts. And when my now wife, who was my restaurant manager at the time, came to the store, she realised the devotion that I had towards the business, and she helped me out quite a fair bit. And so I think that I kind of clicked with her very well, because she was, she's the smartest person I've ever met, and she helped me learn a lot of the things that I've learned now. So I wouldn't be anywhere close to where I am without my wife. And so I don't think it was from the family either side. I definitely think it was because of the learning experiences that I've had.
Now, what advice would you give to any young kid going through, hopefully in this day and age, it wouldn't be anyone going through this. There's obviously things in place, but what advice would you would have given to yourself or maybe someone else who's got a really unstable parent?
Look, I would say get help. And look, it doesn't always need to be a counsellor, because I wasn't ever good at talking to the school counsellors, because you get quite embarrassed. It might be something as simple as talking to a friend of yours, or it might be, and they can help talk to their parents, or even like a close relative. So looking at it now, I had my uncle that I could have went and spoken to. As I told you, my uncle had beat into my dad quite a few times when I was younger. I could have went to him because he would have been someone that would have supported me through it, because he hated what we were going through. So I just think go and get support from anywhere that you possibly can. Don't hide away from it, and don't be ashamed of it, because it's not your fault. What's happening to you. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to leave it there, because it's been a very intense 45 minutes for anyone who's going to be listening to this. Appreciate you telling all this openness, Dan. Like, I remember we obviously knew each other through work, but I didn't know you had this sort of situation, and it's absolutely astounding to even know this now to where you are. I thought a lot really higher off you before even knowing this sort of stuff, a lot more higher now, because you just, as I said at the start, I'll say it again, some people, you can either go two ways with this sort of childhood. You can either go, alcohol, drugs to get over your pain and just use it as an excuse your whole life, which a lot of people do, or you can really use it as a driver to have the courage to go and do all these things, whether it be business or go for your goals and make a really good bloody life for yourself, making sure you use those as lessons of not to do. So an absolute credit to yourself and a champion, mate. Someone your age, being as successful you are and not using that as a crutch in any way is absolutely fantastic. It's really, really happy to hear it, and thanks for sharing it, because I think more people who might have had similar experiences need to start, sharing them. I just think it's a great way to create awareness and give hope to others.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joel. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, mate.
No worries. Cheers.
Thanks, Dan.